Hey everyone, this is Nathan Young, and this is your Mood Boards and Logo Research lecture. So, mood boards, what are they? They're a useful tool for any design project. When your project involves designing a brand, an identity, or logo, your mood boards will probably also include logo research. So, mood boards, they can provide inspiration. It can affirm your brand by translating concepts like culture and values into visual choices. It can provide guidance, so keep your brand focused as you produce more design deliverables. And it communicates. A mood board ensures that everyone involved understands your brand from the start. When you're picking images, look for images and materials that convey emotions that connect with your brand. Be consistent. So ask yourself, does this communicate what you want your brand to communicate? Or is this something that your target audience would find appealing? When you're building your mood board, think about images, colors, visual metaphor, texture, pattern, and shapes. So for your images, go beyond just Pinterest and Google. Find images in magazines or books, or take your own. Look to the classics and in the gutters of our visual landscape. For color, what colors convey the same emotions as your brand? Does your brand suggest brightness and happiness? Is it warm or cool, muted or bold? For those visual metaphors, like a fast car might indicate that your brand is speedy, a tiger might indicate that your brand is fierce, or a lock might communicate that you make your clients feel secure, etc. For those textures and patterns, what does your brand feel like to the touch? Organic shapes feel tranquil, while geometric patterns create visual energy and movement. This is a brand that I designed called Salt City Coffee. They're a coffee shop in Syracuse, New York. And when I started out, I did exactly this process of mood boarding. So to start out, I even just looked for everything I could get my hands on that had the same words. So you'll see the Salt City Dart League or the Salt City CrossFit, Salt City Art and Craft Market, even, the Salt Museum in Syracuse. Those were the ones that I thought looked pretty nice, and then there were ones that looked quite horrible. But the end result was I felt like no one in town really owned the words Salt City. No one, maybe save for this little salt shaker here, or the riff on the Morton salt here for the art and craft fair. No one was really leaning into why Syracuse is referred to the Salt City in the first place, which is their history of industry producing salt. Then I looked even further to brands that might use Salt City that were not just in the city of Syracuse, but anywhere. And again, I just wanted to be aware of, is there like a ton of letter marks and logos out there that are using some kind of visual trick that I should either avoid or at least be aware of? In this case, I didn't really find any. Then I started my mood board in earnest. And as I started grabbing things that feel right to me, that feel inspiring and exciting, I start to categorize them. Just for me, this isn't even client focused yet. So, I start putting them into categories like badges and lettering. I was really interested in just like getting back to the roots of coffee production and trying to represent that. So these were things that made me feel like, okay, let's look at the actual coffee berries on the vine, or let's look at how it's prepared in Ethiopia and so on. Then I actually drove around town, and so these are all images that I just call Syracuse textures because I wanted the brand to feel connected to the city in a way that all those other salt cities didn't. I got even more specific. So the original location for Salt City Coffee was going to be on the north side of Syracuse. So these were all textures that came from that particular neighborhood. This was all stuff that I found attractive that, again, it's not just vintage. It was one that, is particularly fussy. And so I called these all vintage fussy. Vintage but not fussy, right? So we called this vintage monograms and letter marks. This has come up in other lectures, but as a part of this mood boarding, I also went into competitor research. So what are our local coffee shops in town already doing, right? So we know that we want to stand out from whatever they're doing visually. There's a little bit of vintage inspiration here, but I found it to be vague and not compelling. Staying true to the 100-10-1 formula for the iterative design process, I then went into sketching, and the mood boards are absolutely the generative document for all of these sketches. Those monograms, right? I keep finding little monograms, or thinking about the way certain kinds of lockups were done in the early 20th century. From all those sketches, I produced these roughs. Out of those roughs, I presented these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options to the client. And they ended up with this final logo. Mood boards are not just used for yourself, however. Mood boards are also a really helpful design deliverable to show to a client. This deck is actually courtesy of fellow designer and educator Jeff Glendenning. So this was a deck that he did for a food research conference. The design hasn't even started yet. So this is just presenting the mood boarding to the client to get them excited about one or two visual directions that the designer will then use. So this first one, Jeff called accessible. And so then pulled some kind of images that felt to represent accessible in some way. Maybe because they're textured, maybe because they're kind of childlike. And even within that option, there is categories. Here's how something might feel iconographic within that accessible option. Here's option 2, systems. Again, all of this is just what we might call swipe or found imagery, but it's starting to convey to the client what this design direction could be. And even within this option, there are kind of mini options. So these were patterns and multiples, and here is kaleidoscopic imagery. This is the third option of community. Maybe that community, that idea of community is represented in photographs. Maybe it's represented in images of tables, and maybe it's represented in illustration. So we showed illustration in the second option, but here it is again in the third option, but this time with an emphasis on multiple people together, etc. Here's a fourth option called the healthy option. Choosing imagery that feels nutritious, that feels dense, that feels vibrant and colorful. Or maybe it feels really green and natural. So pivoting back to Salt City Coffee, we'd already designed the logo, and here we're now working on a website. So I would do really quick just selections from my mood board to get the client kind of excited about what the option is to come, and also provide context for what I was looking at when I designed this particular option. So here's the mood board slide, and then here's the design option slide for the homepage of that website. Here's option B, again, kind of showing real world examples of here's how type and image can relate to one another. And then here was my web page, homepage example. Here's option C, which I just called attitude, but it's a lot of hand-done typography. And here's how that might work for the homepage of the website. So thanks very much. I hope that helps you think about starting these mood boards and gets you excited to start sketching some logos. Peace.